During the past couple of days, you heard from the professionals, the experts, the authorities. This evening I'm going to deviate a while, as the chairman said, and get into the real politics of Trinidad and Tobago. In that process, I propose to take you down memory lane and to be raw and blunt, sometimes maybe intemperate. I hope you would bear with me. In my presentation here this afternoon, I propose to deal with what I consider to be the three most significant chapters in our political and election history. A lot has been said about our elected system, the role of the media, the dynamics of elections, etc., etc. My presentation will be confined to the period 1946 and onwards, and some of the political events and political personalities who shaped these events by their thoughts and action. Most of these events to which I will refer are from my personal experience with supporting documentation. In this context, I have identified the following chapters: the political atmosphere pre-PNM 1956 and the introduction of party government, the birth of the PNM and the role of its opponents, racial voting and its source of origin. I begin with comments from some of the personalities prior to the PNM and post-PNM. Albert Gomes, Through a Maze of Color, page 120. This is what the political atmosphere was like prior to the PNM. The significant element in the 1950 Constitution was the ministerial system. Although peripheral, fulfilled the basic requirement by closely associating the elected representatives with the administration. True, the governor became a poobah in the sense that he exercised a supervisory discipline over all ministerial directions and formulations. But in practice, the curb on ministerial initiative was negligible. All the business of the Executive Council was funneled through the governor. The insoluble caprice that determined elections that brought into the Executive Council, there was no cabinet at the time, Executive Council presided over by the governor, was funneled through the governor. The insoluble caprice that determined elections had brought into the Executive Council 5 ministers of different racial antecedents. Portuguese like myself, Gomes, of course, like myself, Ferreira. Chinese, Indian, Syrian, and Negro. For the first time, we constituted an elected majority within the council. But we symbolized the racial heterogeneity of our country. Equally, we reflected its political incoherentness and confusion. Yet the hazards we faced were many. To begin, each of us was on his own. No single party allegiance held us together. It is now history that for the first time in our political history, elected representatives were given the opportunity to fully and to some extent directly influence the decision-making process in the Executive Council. At long last, first I have a problem with only this. The legislature and the Executive Council, as ministers, could for the first time really influence policy, as local representatives for the first time, given the opportunity to exercise some influence on the political direction of the country. That was how Albert Gumbs described this achievement. This was 1950. Albert Gumbs, well, he was not chief minister, he was just the most senior elected representatives in the Executive Council. This is how he saw it. 1956, the People's Charter, 24th of January, the Manifesto of the People's National Movement. People of Trinidad, this is Dr. Eric Williams, first Chief Minister, first Premier, and Prime Minister. People of Trinidad and Tobago, you have had 5 years transition into self-government. What they have brought you, a bogus constitution, a bastard democracy, arrested economic development, collective social insecurity, increasing frustration, bungling and indecision by the ministers, which would disgrace even an imperialist government. Do you want a new dispensation? A change for the better? The PMM promises no paradise, offers no millennium. It makes no idiotic promise that you will that you will not have to, or pennies will drop from heaven. TTT in January 1956 was more than ready for a disciplined national rational party organization. The people of TNTT must either be kept down in the ditch in which they are, or they must be pulled out of it. My colleagues and I lack the qualifications to keep you in the ditch. Inward Hunger, page 135. While our representatives were preoccupied with this process, enjoying the limited power now available to them, expatiating, as the saying goes, trying to convince the electorate that we were capable of governing ourselves, the colonizers at the colonial office kept an eagle eye on what was taking place in the colony. Not to be left out were the royal gladiators. On the 10th of October 1950, shortly after a bruising and combative general election under a new constitution, His Excellency the Governor read the proclamation of the new Parliament. After the singing of the then national anthem, God Save the King, the Governor then read His Majesty's the King message. And I'll give you an idea. After a general election, and the people elected their 18 representatives, Parliament was subjected to this. Message from His Majesty the King. On this occasion of the opening of first session of the new Legislative Council, I wish to convey to my people of Trinidad and Tobago an expression of my sincere satisfaction at the major advances in the constitutional development of the colony. The inauguration of a new constitution affords great opportunities. It also imposes great responsibility on the government, legislative and the people alike. I have watched with close interest the King. I have watched with great interest and sympathy. King is sympathetic to us now. The manner in which the people in the two islands have in the past availed themselves of the increasing opportunities to participate in the work of the government. And the recent election has shown their interest in political affairs continue to increase. I am confident that the representatives of the Council and those who are chosen to share as members of the Executive Council the heavy responsibility of the government will not fail the people of these islands, and that they will continue to advance the good name and prosperity of the colony, whose well-being in every sphere is my deep and abiding concern. The King of England in 1950. And this is followed by a message from the Secretary of State from the colonies, advising us on the state of the country. It must have been the last throat speech from King George VI, who died on the 6th of February 1952. The people's elected representative not only has to sing the national anthem, but listen attentively to His Majesty's message to his subjects, followed by greetings from the Secretary of State for the Colonies and several other representatives from colonial territories like ourselves. This is what Dr. Williams referred to as a bogus constitution, not a bastard democracy. Gums referred to the governor as a poobah in the sense that he exercised its supervisory discipline over all ministerial directions and formulations. The governor selected the speaker, the nominated members, ex officios. The breakdown of the 1950 parliament is as follows: 18 elected representatives, and it's good that you know who they are. In 1950. Roy Joseph, San Fernando. Albert Gomes, Port of Spain North. Victor Bryan, Eastern Counties. APT James, Tobago. Ranjit Kumar, member of Caroni North. Chang Kamaraj, member of St. Joseph. Ajoda Singh, that's one name, Ajoda Singh. Member St. Patrick East. T.U.B. Butler, member St. Patrick West. E. Duval, member for St. George West. Aubrey James, Port of Spain East. Pope McLean, Raymond Covada, Ashford Senator, Mitchell Senator, Norman Tang, C.G. Neto. What is interesting here is what I will tell you now. After the proclamation was read, and the speaker, the first speaker, Sir William Savory, was selected, not elected. He asked the 18 representatives, elected representatives, not the ex officios, to select 5 ministers, the elected representatives. Out of the 18, 2, the member for Arima, Charles Gomes Neto, said he was not interested in ministerial office, and Edwin Duval. As a consequence, the 18 members elected our first 5 ministers to the Executive Council: Albert Gomes, Norman Tang, Ajuda Singh, Victor Bryan, and Roy Joseph. As I said, the governor selected the speaker, the nominated members, and the ex officios. Contrary to several opinions expressed from time to time, many of them documented, no party won an absolute majority. The Butler Party won the most seats, but not enough to form a government. Most of the 18 elected representatives, in spite of a few of them identifying themselves with one of the existing parties, in reality were independents who won on their own popularity. For example, Bryan, Tang, Ajuda Singh, Neto, Duval, etc. Recognizing the configuration that emerged from our second general elections, since the granting of adult franchise in 1946, the Speaker, as I said before, called on the 18 elected members to elect. It is against this background that we must review and analyze the history of our elections and the electoral system from the era of the granting of adult franchise in 1946. That's the first time we were 21 years and over. Prior to that, it's what they call a restricted franchise, where only people with property were entitled to vote. So the most interesting aspect of our political system during that was the granting of adult franchise in 1946. It is against this background that we must review and analyze the history of our elections and from the era. the introduction of ministerial representation from the Executive Council in 1950 to the Cabinet in 1959. The Cabinet, the Executive Council preceded the Cabinet. Almost 75 years ago, on the 10th of October 2025, we will celebrate 75 years of ministerial representation. To date, and this particular day, well, mostly young people here, they will listen to this. To date, neither the role or recognition of our first 5 ministers have been given official recognition. They remain unrecognized, unknown, and almost completely forgotten. Next year is 75 years, our first. In other words, for the first time, our elected representatives was given the opportunity to become involved in the decision-making process of the colony. To date, successive government has given no recognition to Albert Gums. He died in England almost a pauper. Norman Tang, our first Minister of Health. Roy Joseph, our first Minister of Education. Ajoda Singh, our first Minister of Works. And Tang was our first Minister of Health. Roy Joseph, Ajoda Singh. They recently opened a highway from San Fernando to Point Fonte and named it after football, completely ignoring the contribution of our first Minister of Works, Mr. Ajoda Singh, from a place called Grand Straits in Rosilac. There is no historical monument of Victor Bryan, our first Minister of Agriculture. I think the only one that got a little recognition was Roy Joseph. He got an OBE. They're in the process of constructing a road now from Valencia to Toco. The man that opened up the Eastern County was our first minister, Victor Bryan, not a word. There's younger people, some of you all probably never heard these names. And Norman Tang, our first Minister of Health. The time has come to put this wrong right. Next year will be 75 years celebrating our first official recognition by the people's representatives. I don't think I don't know what to call names, any of the politicians past or recognize the contribution of these founding fathers of our ministerial system. Historians, much more I hope will be documented in the future. My responsibility here this evening as a political activist over the past 70, an elementary student of history, of our political history, is to present my own experience, my own observations and views of what transpired during the historical transitional period that took us from a British colony, self-government, and subsequently to independence, Trinidad and Tobago. This cannot be done without reference to the pre- and post-PNM era, ethnic voting and how it started. And you will bear with me, because this is a very interesting topic. Not a day passes in this country where comments are not made about the pattern of voting, the racial, the ethnic, and so on. I now want to quote from a document, the autobiography of Albert Gums, 1946. This is Gums. There was another aspect of this 1946 general election that revealed yet another sinister side of the racial spectrum. Racial assertiveness was by no means the exclusive preserve of the Negroes. Indian advance was equally spectacular and rapid. as Mother India drew closer to independence, there were comparable stirrings among Trinidad Indians. As it turned out, India was at the time of 1946 election only 2 years away from the goal of independence. The electoral ferment then, which in one notable instance involved a contest between two prominent political personalities. But the foundation of this and other similar manifestations of growing hostility had been laid earlier when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. It was not in Ethiopia, it was Abyssinia. In 1934, it was evident that the reaction in Trinidad to this flagrant act of aggression was inspired by much more than mere indignation, because the bully had set upon the meek and deficient. Trinidad Negroes made common cause with their African brothers across the waters. There was a spontaneous burgeoning of beards, black faces that long had prided themselves on their perpetual smoothness. The Emperor Haile Selassie was being flattered and emulation. In the same way, and with almost identical posturing, Trinidad Indians responded to the emergence of India. Gandhi hats and sumptuous saris suddenly reinforced the exotic and richly varied landscape. It was as if a cult had exploded in our midst and was casting its incongruous abracadabra everywhere. Indian women who were second, even third generation Trinidadians, and long inured to Western dress, began to sport saris publicly as of not only social and cultural, but also political activities. From India, these fashionable women not only changed their mode of dress and had casts of class symbols painted on their foreheads. India's patriotic holidays were observed in Trinidad with a fierce jingoistic zeal by the defendants of the immigrants who had come originally as indentured laborers for the sugar industry estates. The process of assimilation was being revered. Indeed, within the riotous heterogeneous brew, a sinister condemnation of the two main ethnic components was in rapid progress. Would this hardening of the racial attitudes of both Negro and Indians lead ultimately to a confrontation, to a confrontational campaign? For as I journeyed from tongue to tongue, from village to village, and even into the most remote places, deploying egalitarian ideas which implied that racial harmony was one of the prerequisites of the island's peace and prosperity. The sinister pattern of mutual hostility was increasingly defined. Our candidates were a mix of blood, Negro, Indian, Chinese, Syrian, Portuguese, all shades of color. Indeed, representatives of the whole rag bag, as Guns called it. And precisely for this reason, we became incongruously posted. Whenever we campaign in areas of high Indian concentration, or wherever popular at the time, there have been a few danger spots. I needed especially to avoid. Even I experienced some discomfort in areas where either blacks nationalism or Indian racialism predominated. Two separate incidents of the time will illustrate the context in which our campaign was bedeviled by racialism. In a predominantly Indian area, our candidate was Dr. David Pitt, long since settled in England and once an unsuccessful Labour candidate for Parliament, now leader of CARD. His opponent in 1946 was a prominent Indian engineer who previously had held office in local government. One Sunday morning, we decided to invade the enemy's stronghold. The village of Penal, where almost every other person is an Indian. I confess to having had the trepidation, although as it turned out, I was the only speaker granted an audience. I have a vivid recollection of our entry into a hostile audience. A pundit present who early took charge of the affairs, deciding who should and who should not be heard, until the pundit in English assured all those present that I was the only one welcome. I spent anxious moments as several of the passion speakers were delivered in Hindi. Anxious moments at several passion speeches were delivered in Hindi. Indeed, I looked on without envy, or worse. Significantly, two types of those present came an anathema to our pundit friend and the Indian on our side. There was venom, and the worst was reserved for the Indians who supported Dr. Pitt. Their cause, they thereby betrayed their race and were guilty of unpardonable offense of thwarting an Indian ambition to satisfy. The pundit, eyes bulging and inflamed, face choleric with passion, seemingly lost for words, in a paroxysm of sheer violent anger, exploded. Take Dr. Pitt and put him in the pit with the shit. This is the pundit, chairman of the meeting. One, he said the only person welcome to speak at that meeting was Guns. Dr. Pitt, obviously, because of a Negro, he was opposed to an Indian and the Indians who aligned themselves with the cause. They thereby betrayed their race and were guilty of an unpardonable offense. It was the same oppressive minority atmosphere that we met supporting a colored candidate against a Negro. We ventured into Uriah Butler's stronghold, Faisabad, the historical cradle of 1937 disturbances. Strutting the serried Guns' inscrutable ranks during inspect suddenly exploded in concrete violence. They seemed to come from nowhere. The huge stones and boulders that from all sides cascaded down upon us in ceaseless trajectory, and as though propelled by wicked, gloating hands. It was something of a miracle that we escaped with our lives. This is Guns in 1946, writing about the racial conflict that existed at the time. And Guns found it necessary when he went to England to India to complain to the Indian representative of the United Nations, the powerful and famous Krishna Menon, who was the Indian representative of what was happening in Trinidad, representative. And we short-circuited this. When India achieved independence in 1948, the pageantry of the extraterritorial patriotism exceeded itself in Trinidad. An Indian High Commissioner appeared on the scene, appointed by the government, obviously with the consent of Her Majesty's government. But the people of Trinidad and Tobago had no knowledge about it. This much I know because I was a member of the Executive Council. We just were not consulted. And he went on to say, when he went to England, he complained to the Secretary of State to the colonies of what was going on in Trinidad. Because it's very fashionable today by most of our commentators to accuse the PNM and the UNC or the DLP of introducing the racial situation in Trinidad and Tobago. I make reference to this simply to what prevailed in 1946 in Trinidad and Tobago. So this, the source of origin of racial voting in Trinidad and Tobago. Here was Dr. David Pitt, a distinguished medical practitioner who was the candidate for the West Indian Independence Party, coming up against Ranjit Kumar, one of the most brilliant engineers this country has ever seen, a citizen of India who migrated here and was responsible for the successful construction of Rice Road. As a matter of fact, there is a strong view, and that includes me, that that road should be changed from Rice Road to Ranjit Kumar Road. Ranjit Kumar was the engineer who took over from Rice, an Englishman, and got all there was sea. He contested the general elections in 1946. As a matter of fact, coming out of Professor Brinsley Samaru's historical productions, Kumar was invited by Dr. Pitt to help him in the constituency of Victoria. And when Kumar came down there, as a citizen of India, and he recognized the volume of the amount of Indians were there, and he was able to speak to them in his own, in their own tongue, or however you may wish to call it. And he decided that he will contest the seat against the man who he went down there to support. It is documented in Dr. Samaru's. And contested the Victoria seat against Dr. Pitt and set the highest number of votes in Trinidad until 1986. Kumar polled almost 14,000 votes in the county of Victoria in 1946. As a consequence of that, Dr. Pitt migrated to England. Shortly after the 1946 elections, joined the British Labour Party, contested the election unsuccessfully, and subsequently became the second back Lord in the House of Lords, succeeding our own Larry Constantine, the Baron of Marval. Dr. Pitt. His daughter is a medical practitioner at the hospital. So that gives some semblance of correctness to the concept that it was PNM and Pandey or Badis that introduced racial, began when Mussolini invaded Abyssinia in 1934 and the emergence of Indian independence in 1947. It brought a new dimension to the sons and daughters of slaves, and they were able to identify themselves with something that they had long sought. They sympathized with the Abyssinians for the invasion, and the Indo-Trinidadians got some measure of glory that India at long last had achieved the independence. A better aspect to the concept. Gums correctly stated that the first 5 ministers, inclusive of himself, had no party allegiance. Invariably, it was the age of the individual and individualism. The quality of aspirants for political office, both at the local and central government level, comprised professionals, businessmen, proprietors, house agents, and comedians. Not to be left out, we had more than our fair share of lunatics, all in a desperate effort to get into office. Local government elections in the municipalities were held annually. As a matter of fact, 4 of our first 5 ministers were products of local government. Gums, Brian, Roy Joseph, Norman Tang, Neto was also a product of local government system. Of course, this group did not exclude those in defense of the status quo and those identified with one of the existing parties. The following is a breakdown of political parties during the pre- and post-PNM period. 1946, 4 parties, 9 constituencies. 1950, 8 parties, 18 constituencies. 1956, 7 parties, 24 constituencies. 61, 4 parties, 30 constituencies. 1966, 7 parties, 36 constituencies. 1971, 3 parties, 36 constituencies. 76, 10 parties, 36 constituencies. 81, 10 parties, 36 constituencies. 91, 4 parties, 36. 95, 4. From the rich and famous, the genuine freedom fighters, to the comedians and lunatic fringe, invariably the story was almost the same. Vote for me and I will set you free. Vote for me and I will take care of you from the cradle to the grave. Manifestos were characterized by the following promises. Increase old age pension. That's what the manifestos. Increase poor relief. More standpipes in the villages. Converting muddy tracks into passable roads. No increase in Kakapool rum and Anchor Dog cigarette. Kakapool cheap rum. More and better medication from the village health centers. And finally, home rule and self-government. The cry was freedom and liberty to establish the rights of democracy. Candidates left no stone unturned in their efforts to convince the electorate of their honesty, integrity, and good intentions. In doing so, the election battlefield knew no limits. Both conventional and unconventional weapons were available. It was the era of mauvais stone pelting, mudslinging, muckraking, rotten eggs, and stale urine. Boy, you had to come good or face the consequences. Not only of your opponent, but an angry, dispossessed electorate now enjoying the right to select their own representative. There was little or no party protection. The pre-action protocol revolution, like today's social and electronic media, had not yet arrived. The professional canvasser, mic men, and false propaganda experts were in great demand, available to the highest bidder. You talk about code of ethics, you will hear the code of ethics now. The following examples will clearly demonstrate this aspect of our political during the PNM. One candidate under a barrage of heckling was asked, "Where your manifesto?" He responded, "It's 6 inches below my waist, send your wife a copy." Another was asked, "What do you do with the party money?" He responded, "You fast and out of place, ask your mother, I deposit it in the Hairy Bank." Yet another was asked, how can you support a candidate like that? His father was the village fowl thief, and his mother was charged for importuning men for immoral purposes, whatever that means. In another instance, the mic man went to tongue on the candidate's opponent. Vote Neto and have your bottoms bitten by the mosquitoes. The professional canvassers, the likes of Carlton and Shelley Reese, these were the professional canvassers who the candidates paid to campaign for them. Willis DeRosa, Shamil Coombs, Ira Henry, Gladys Roberts, Leon Jessel Alexis of Roy Joseph 8th Army, Loudmouth Lungs from Victor Bryan Red Cappers, and many others would destroy your credibility and credentials without any consequences. There are no pre-action protocol letters. Why did it place some measure of loyalty to candidate A? Invariably, they went to the highest bidder. They changed loyalty once the price was right. Elections were opportunities to pass judgment on the incumbents, access the new aspirants, and provide some comic relief long before Dan Ratz had played his whining propensities. Political entertainment had always been part of our political culture, pre-PNM and post-PNM. To the shock and surprise of the colony on the 21st June 1955, the very day Dr. Williams' contract with the Caribbean Commission was terminated, he came to Woodford Square and declared his intention to enter the political Guyad. Quote, inward hunger. I'm going to let down my bucket where I am, right here, where I am with you in the British West Indies. This is Dr. Williams. A crowd of over 10,000 listeners roared its approval. The electorate was caught with its pants down. The politicians were caught with their pants off. In preparation for the launching of the party, he gave several lectures throughout the country on the following topics: economic problems in Trinidad and Tobago, constitutional reform in TTT, the historical background of race relations in the Caribbean, the case for party politics in TNT, further thoughts on federation. At that time, we were discussing the federation of the West Indies. This was intellectual champagne, laced with academic caviar, served in layman receptacles and easily consumable. The masses had not heard anything like this before. All this took place between the 21st of June 1955 and the launching of the party on the 24th of January 1956. He then proceeded to launch the party at 52 locations before the date of the general elections was announced, inclusion of the presentation of the historical People's Charter and the party's constitution. The party was structurally built from the bottom up, from the party group, the constituency group, the general council, and on to the annual convention. Such a political organization was unprecedented. A true national party had finally arrived, led by a well-educated and highly respected colonial scholar of African origin. Afro-Trinidadians have always been in the vanguard of the struggle for self-government. There was to be no turning back. Caught with their proverbial pants off, his opponents panicked and went after him with vengeance. Williams must be destroyed at all or any cost. The battle was led by and this again is very interesting. The battle was led by the then powerful Roman Catholic Church, led by the then legendary Archbishop Count Finbar Ryan, who recruited Don Basil Matthews as his commander-in-chief, and Father Leahy, an Irish priest, as his #1 political hitman. The print media, led by Courtney Hitchens from the Trinidad Guardian, the local battalion of the once powerful Roman Empire, left no stone unturned in their efforts to protect the papacy and destroy the devil incarnate. Their final piece of artillery was on the 23rd of January September 1956, when the Trinidad Guardian published that document, comparing Eric Williams with the most destructive human being that ever created, Hitler, and advised a vote for the PNM is a vote against God. And that is all this came to an end at midnight on the 24th of September 1956, when the PNM was declared winners with a resounding victory, winning 13 of the 24 seats. The party system had finally arrived and accepted by the electorate, ending the political commerce that previously prevailed. In spite of the fact that Williams was commander-in-chief, the general support for the PNM and what it offered to the electorate. The People's Charter stated that the country was now ready for a new dispensation, a national political structure solidly constructed from the bottom up to protect its members, supporters, and by extension, the national community from the tragedies that have and continue to overtake so many former colonies built on shifting sand. And this again takes us into that most dangerous period, that transitional period between colonialism and nationalism. That is the most dangerous aspect of the former colonies that aspired from colonialism to national. And we have seen it. In India, 2 prime ministers were assassinated, Rajiv Gandhi and Indira Gandhi. Madam Bhutto was assassinated in Pakistan. Sir Abu Bakr Tafiya Balio, the first president of Nigeria, was found dead in a canal in Lagos. We know what happened right here in Grenada with Maurice Bishop. So that transitional period where we move from colonialism, in other words, we move from the white man into our own self-government. As Kwame Nkrumah told the last British High Commissioner for the then Gold Coast, when he asked him, well, now we're going, the British going, what will you do? He said, give us a chance to guide or misguide ourselves. And the great Mahatma Gandhi told the last Viceroy of India, the Lord Mountbatten, well, we're leaving, we're going, how the hell are you going to make out? You're all going to have problems? He said, but those problems will be our problems, and we are going to be responsible for solving them. So that period, and as journalists, all our to research that period and see to some extent, and this has nothing to do with the PNM, that's how fortunate we are to have during that period a group of leaders who successfully took us peacefully through that transitional period from colonialism to independence. We see what happened in Uganda. We see people like Idi Amin. We see what happened in Sierra Leone. We see what happened in most of the British and French colonies. We see it happening in Nigeria. And we, as a small Twin Island state, were able to successfully, whatever the problems were, and actually, we successfully navigated that channel, that today we could still enjoy that measure of freedom and liberty that so many of the former colonies have not enjoyed. Our political history continues to be characterized by one major question: how to defeat the PNM. That's the major question every election: how to beat the PNM. So, as we proceed to our next general election in 2025, the chorus remains the same. Bury the hatchet, but mark the spot. So every election they bury the hatchet. And on the few occasions that they have defeated the PNM, they go back and pick up the hatchet and destroy one another. The same continues today. Yes. How to defeat? And there is nothing wrong with defeating the PNM. I have been partly responsible for the first major defeat of the PNM. As the party organizer of the ONR, and I'll give you briefly that history before I complete. Yet another attempt to build a coalition to defeat the PNM in the next general elections. If my memory serves me well, this is about the 30th attempt since the DLP led by Badis Barrage in 1957 brought together some of the most diverse political elements ever to come together. In our political history, chronic antagonisms were conveniently buried. Gary Griffith and Kamla. In their effort to defeat the PNM in the Ferdie election in 1958, bringing together Gums and Sir Gerald White of the POPPG, Victor Bryan and APT James of the Trinidad Labour Party, Roy Joseph of the 8th Army, and several other ambitious conspirators. They won the elections. They conveniently buried the political hatchet, but they marked the spot. It did not take them very long after the collapse of the Federation in 1962 to resume their chronic antagonisms. The rest of this successful marriage of convenience in 1956 is now part of our political history. Since then, several more attempts have been made to bring all the opponents of the PNM together, the latest being the PPP in 2010, that attracted all the anti-PNM elements, many of them resurrected from the cemetery, and bingo, defeated the PNM. The rest of this unholy marriage of convenience, inclusive of the dismissal of 24 cabinet ministers during its 5 years in government, is yet another aspect of our political history that continues to be conveniently forgotten by our aspiring political leaders and their disciples. As they continue with their efforts to defeat the PNM, most of these quacks and political invalids, without enough members to fill a small maxi, sometimes capture our attention from some of the media. I make reference to these historical events in the context of my own experience as both a founding member of the PNM in 1956 and the ONR in 1980. The history of the PNM arrival in 1956, its early success, its durability over the last 67 years, while not yet fully documented, is well known. Today I wish to share with you the history of the ONR and basically what is required to build a strong national party with the capacity not only of defeating the PNM, but to ensure a standard of quality representation capable of being an alternative government. This is what we successfully attempted to achieve with the formation of the ONR in 1980, under the leadership of Carl Phillip, with a mandate from the then Multiracial Land Tenants Association with a national membership of over 70,000 members. This is the foundation of the ONR. As party organizer and political advisor to the party leader, based on my 24 years experience as a political activist in the PNM, I was not going to participate and or engage in political prostitution, political adventurism, or cheap, unproductive publicity. If you are entering the political arena, your number one objective is to win the elections and form the government. As a consequence, we proceeded accordingly. Like the PNM, we prepared and presented the electorate with our statement of fundamental principles, followed by our party constitution. As party organizer, I not only managed the campaign, but led from the front, organizing the 34 constituencies in Trinidad, speaking at over 300 meetings between the launching of the party in 1980 and the general elections of 1981. Fully engaged in myself as party organizer in the screening process. If we are offering ourselves as an alternative, we must be ready and prepared to govern the country at the exit of the outgoing government. Huh? 5 minutes left. Yeah, yes. with these objectives, as priorities, I finish on this. We presented the electorate not only with a pickup side, or a wind ball cricket team, but the following team: 6 attorneys at law, 6 medical practitioners, 5 education experts. So, economists, accountants, media personnel, technologists. We did not contest the 2 Tobago seats. Our party polled over 91,000 votes. We ran second in 22 constituencies, third in 12. No party in our political has ever offered the electorate a more formidable and qualified set of candidates. As predicted, we did not get a damn seat. However, it was the foundation we laid in 1981 that was responsible for the unprecedented defeat of the PNM in 1986 by the NAR, a coalition that unfortunately the ONR entered and ultimately suffered the consequences of these convenient marriages on unholy alliance, invariably led by political opportunists whose only objective is to defeat it. Winning is one thing, governing the country is another. I hope I've given you. Someone tell me I have 5 more minutes. I don't want an extension. I hope I've given you a background of what our political history and our election history is, from the granting of adult franchise in 1946. Thank you, Mr. Education, attorneys. We had him attorneys at law, medical education, engineers and energy, economic accounts, media, labor and industrial relations, technology, real estate. Yes. We had Lennox Raphael. No, no. Yeah. No, but none of this was the ONR, not the PNM. This was the ONR.
I've just I know it will require more than a quick response, but I'm doing some personal work on what I consider to be the myth of the importation of migrants from neighboring islands, Trinidad and St. Vincent. And I have the immigration statistics from that period, where what I consider to be the myth of the PNM importing votes for the 1956 election.
Total absurdity.
Those people were already here, is my contention.
They were not only here, but they built the country. It was the people from the Caribbean island that built the oil fields.
Butler was here since the early 30s.
Yeah, the cocoa estates.
Yeah.
When after the abolition of slavery, and the Afro, well, I can't call them Afro-Trinbagonians, they had just been released from bondage, and they run from the estates. It's the islanders that came in and built the cocoa estates, which was one of the great revenue owners in those days, owned by the French Creoles.